Last night's Jimmy Kimmel Live turned into an absolute disaster when Will Smith confronted the host over disrespectful comments about his family, leading to the most explosive celebrity meltdown ever captured on live television. The studio audience settled into their seats, expecting another routine celebrity interview. Will Smith had appeared on Jimmy Kimmel Live numerous times over the years, and tonight was supposed to be a lighthearted promotion for his upcoming film project. The energy in the room felt typical: cameras rolling, band playing, and Kimmel delivering his usual opening monologue with that familiar smirk plastered across his face. As the show progressed through its standard segments, there were subtle signs that something wasn't quite right. Kimmel seemed more aggressive than usual during his opening jokes, making several pointed references to Hollywood elites who think they're above consequences, and actors who can't handle a little criticism. The audience laughed along, unaware that these weren't just random jabs but carefully orchestrated setup for what was about to unfold. When Will Smith finally walked onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. He waved to the crowd with his characteristic charm, that million-dollar smile lighting up the studio. But anyone paying close attention could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set just a little too tight. He'd clearly heard about Kimmel's recent comments during various interviews and social media posts, comments that had been building up over the past several weeks. The interview started innocuously enough. Kimmel asked about Smith's new project, his fitness routine, and his family life. Smith answered with practiced professionalism, but there was an edge to his responses that seasoned talk show viewers might have recognized. The host, however, seemed to be deliberately pushing boundaries, making subtle digs disguised as humor. "So, Will," Kimmel said, leaning back in his chair with that trademark condescending tone, "you've been pretty quiet lately, not making as many public appearances. Some people are saying you're trying to lay low after all the, well, let's call them incidents from the past few years." Smith's smile faltered for just a moment. "I've been focusing on my work and my family, Jimmy. That's what matters to me." Right, Kimmel nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't buying it. "Your family. Speaking of which, there's been a lot of talk about your wife recently. Some interesting revelations about your marriage, your personal life. Must be tough having all that drama played out in public." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the light, promotional banter they'd expected. Smith's publicist, sitting in the front row, looked visibly concerned, already reaching for her phone. "My family is off limits, Jimmy," Smith said, his voice dropping an octave. "We've discussed this before," but Kimmel wasn't backing down. In fact, he seemed energized by Smith's discomfort, like a predator sensing weakness. "Oh, come on, Will. You put your whole life out there on social media. Your wife talks about everything on her show. You can't pick and choose when you want privacy. There's a difference between sharing your story and having someone exploit it for cheap laughs," Smith replied, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. The tension was becoming palpable. Audience members were exchanging glances, unsure whether this was part of some elaborate bit, or if they were witnessing a real confrontation unfold. The show's producers in the control room were frantically discussing whether to cut to commercial. Kimmel, however, was just getting started. He'd been planning this moment for weeks, ever since Smith's team had agreed to the appearance. There had been bad blood between them for months, stemming from various industry disputes and personal slights that the public knew nothing about. "You know what I think, Will?" Kimmel said, his voice taking on that fake sincere tone he used when delivering his most cutting remarks. "I think you're angry because people are finally seeing through the act. The perfect family man, the beloved movie star, the guy who can do no wrong. But we all know that's not the real story, don't we?" Smith's jaw clenched. "What exactly are you trying to say, Jimmy?" "I'm saying maybe it's time for some honesty. Your marriage has been a joke for years. Your kids can't stand you and your career is hanging by a thread. But sure, let's pretend everything's fine and talk about your new movie that nobody's going to see." The studio fell dead silent. Even the band members stopped their casual chattering. This had crossed every line of professional courtesy and basic human decency. Smith sat there for a moment, processing what had just been said on live television, to millions of viewers. "You want honesty?" Smith said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Let's talk about honesty, Jimmy. Let's talk about how you've built your entire career on tearing other people down. How you hide behind this fake nice guy persona while you're actually one of the most toxic people in this industry." Kimmel's smirk wavered slightly, but he pressed on. "Oh, here we go. Can't handle a little criticism, so you're going to attack me? What are you going to do, Smith? Slap me?" The reference to the infamous Academy Awards incident hit like a thunderbolt. The audience gasped collectively, some people actually standing up from their seats. Smith's face went through a series of emotions: shock, rage, and something that looked almost like betrayal. This wasn't just professional antagonism anymore. This was personal warfare being waged on live television. Smith stood up slowly from his chair, his hands shaking with barely controlled fury, as Kimmel realized he might have finally pushed too far. The studio lights seemed to dim as Will Smith towered over the desk, his 6'2" frame casting a shadow across Kimmel's suddenly pale face. The host's trademark smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a look of genuine concern as he realized the magnitude of what he'd just said. But his ego wouldn't let him back down now, not in front of millions of viewers and his live studio audience. "Sit down, Will," Kimmel said, trying to regain control of the situation. "It was just a joke. You know, comedy. Something you used to understand before you became so sensitive about everything." Smith's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the dead-silent studio like thunder. "A joke? You think destroying someone's reputation and humiliating their family on national television is a joke?" The camera operators were having a field day, zooming in on Smith's face, capturing every muscle twitch, every flash of anger in his eyes. The show's director was barking orders through headsets, telling cameramen to get different angles, sensing that this was television gold, the kind of moment that would be replayed endlessly on social media and news programs for weeks to come. "Look, I get that you're upset," Kimmel continued, but his tone was still condescending, still mocking. "But this is show business, Will. If you can't handle the heat, maybe you should have stayed out of the kitchen. Or better yet, maybe you should have thought about that before you made yourself a walking punchline." That last comment was the final straw. Smith's publicist was now frantically waving at the producers, mouthing, "Cut to commercial," but everyone was too mesmerized by the unfolding drama to respond. The audience sat frozen, some people recording on their phones despite the show's strict no-recording policy. "You want to know what's really pathetic, Jimmy?" Smith said, his voice gaining strength and conviction. "You've spent years hiding behind this desk, taking shots at people who are actually out there creating something, building something, contributing something to the world. What do you contribute? What do you create besides misery and division?" Kimmel's face was reddening now, his own anger starting to surface. "I contribute truth, Will. I call out hypocrites like you who pretend to be something they're not. I expose the lies that Hollywood tries to sell people." "Truth?" Smith laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You wouldn't know truth if it slapped you in the face. You peddle gossip and cruelty disguised as entertainment. You profit off other people's pain." The host stood up now too, clearly feeling threatened by Smith's physical presence. "Don't you dare lecture me about profiting off pain. Your entire comeback tour has been built on sympathy for what happened at the Oscars. You've monetized your own mistakes." "At least I owned my mistakes," Smith shot back. "At least I took responsibility and tried to make amends. What have you ever taken responsibility for? How many careers have you damaged? How many families have you hurt with your comedy?" The tension was so thick it was almost suffocating. Audience members were starting to leave, uncomfortable with witnessing what felt like a very private, very real breakdown of two men's professional relationship. The show's security team had quietly moved closer to the stage, ready to intervene if things escalated further. Kimmel, perhaps sensing he was losing the room, decided to double down on his cruelty. "You know what, Will? You're right. I should take responsibility. I should apologize for giving you a platform tonight. I should apologize to my viewers for subjecting them to another one of your pathetic attempts at rehabilitation." Smith's hands were clenched into fists now, his entire body trembling with rage. "You miserable, pathetic excuse for a human being. You sit here night after night, tearing people down because it makes you feel powerful. Because deep down, you know you're nothing without other people's misery to feed off of." "At least I'm not a walking embarrassment to my own family," Kimmel snapped back, his voice rising to match Smith's intensity. "At least my wife doesn't publicly humiliate me on her talk show. At least my kids don't have to explain their father's behavior to their friends at school." The audience gasped audibly. Even by late-night television standards, this had gone too far. Smith looked like he'd been physically struck. His eyes flashed with such pure rage that several people in the front row actually moved back in their seats. "You crossed the line," Smith said, his voice deadly calm now. "You just crossed every single line." Kimmel seemed to realize he'd gone too far, but his pride wouldn't let him apologize. Instead, he tried to deflect with more humor. "What line? The line where we pretend your family isn't a complete disaster? The line where we pretend you're still relevant?" Smith took a step toward the desk, and for a moment, everyone in that studio thought they were about to witness something that would end both men's careers forever. The security guards tensed, ready to move. The producers were screaming into their headsets. The audience held its collective breath. "You want to keep going, Jimmy?" Smith asked, his voice carrying 20 years of Hollywood frustration, personal pain, and righteous anger. "Because I've got all night, and unlike you, I've got nothing left to lose." The camera caught Kimmel's face in that moment, the exact second when he realized that Will Smith was no longer the controlled, media-trained movie star he thought he could push around. This was a man who had reached his breaking point, and there was no telling what would happen next. For a split second, the studio existed in complete silence. Even the cameramen had stopped moving, afraid that any sound might trigger an explosion. That would make television history for all the wrong reasons. Kimmel's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, finally understanding that he had pushed one of Hollywood's biggest stars past his limit on live television. But instead of backing down, Kimmel's ego kicked in one final time. Maybe it was the adrenaline, maybe it was the knowledge that millions were watching, or maybe it was just his complete inability to admit when he was wrong. Whatever the reason, he decided to throw one more match onto the gasoline he'd already poured. "You know what, Will?" Kimmel said, his voice shaking slightly but still defiant. "The truth is, everyone in this town has been walking on eggshells around you for years, pretending your little outbursts are normal, pretending your family drama isn't a complete circus, but somebody has to say what everyone's thinking." Smith's eyes went completely cold. The rage was still there, but now it was focused, crystallized into something far more dangerous than raw anger. "What everyone's thinking, or what you're thinking because you're too much of a coward to deal with your own problems." "My problems?" Kimmel laughed, but it sounded hollow and desperate. "I'm not the one who assaulted someone on live television, in front of the entire world. I'm not the one whose marriage is a running joke on social media. I'm not the one whose children won't even appear in public with him anymore." The audience was now openly uncomfortable. People were checking their phones, looking toward the exits, whispering to each other. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was two men destroying each other in real time, and everyone could feel it. Smith leaned forward, placing both hands on Kimmel's desk. The host instinctively leaned back, suddenly aware of how physically imposing Smith could be when he wasn't playing the charming movie star. "You want to talk about cowardice, Jimmy? Let's talk about how you make a living attacking people who can't fight back because they have careers to protect." Let's talk about how you punch down at people going through the worst moments of their lives because it gets you ratings. I expose hypocrisy, Kimmel shot back, but his voice was getting higher, more defensive. I hold people accountable when no one else will. You exploit trauma for profit, Smith countered, his voice getting louder with each word. You take people's pain and turn it into punchlines. You've built your entire career on being cruel to people when they're already down. The show's executive producer was now in the studio, having run down from the control room. He was frantically trying to get the attention of both men, making cutting motions across his throat, but both were too locked in their confrontation to notice. Kimmel stood up again, trying to match Smith's energy. You know what's cruel, Will? What's cruel is lying to people. What's cruel is pretending to be this perfect family man while your personal life is falling apart. What's cruel is making everyone walk on eggshells around you because you can't handle criticism. Criticism? Smith's voice cracked with incredulous rage. This isn't criticism, Jimmy. This is character assassination. This is you trying to destroy someone because you're jealous of what they've accomplished. Jealous? Kimmel's voice rose to match Smith's. Jealous of what? Your dying career? Your broken family? Your reputation as Hollywood's biggest loose cannon? That was it? Smith slammed his hand down on the desk so hard that Kimmel's coffee mug jumped and spilled across his note cards. The sound echoed through the studio like a gunshot, and several audience members actually screamed. You pathetic, miserable excuse for a human being, Smith said, his voice now carrying years of built-up frustration. You sit here every night thinking you're some kind of moral authority, but you're nothing but a bully with a microphone. You're everything that's wrong with this industry, with this culture of tearing people down for entertainment. Kimmel's face was now completely red, veins bulging in his neck. Don't you dare lecture me about morality. You're the one who lost control and embarrassed yourself in front of the entire world. You're the one who can't keep his family together. You're the one who's becoming irrelevant and can't handle it. At least I'm fighting for something, Smith roared back. At least I'm trying to build something, create something, leave something positive behind. What are you fighting for, Jimmy? What are you creating besides pain and division? What's your legacy going to be besides making people feel worse about themselves? The security guards were now positioned around the stage, ready to move at the moment's notice. The audience was in complete chaos, some people filming despite the rules, others heading for the exits, everyone talking at once. The band had completely stopped playing, and even they looked scared. Kimmel, perhaps realizing that he was losing control of everything, decided to go for the nuclear option. You want to know what my legacy will be? My legacy will be that I wasn't afraid to tell the truth about people like you, that I didn't let celebrities get away with being fake just because they're famous. Fake? Smith laughed, but it was the sound of a man who had nothing left to lose. You want to see fake, Jimmy? Fake is sitting behind this desk every night, pretending to care about social justice while you destroy people for ratings. Fake is acting like you're fighting for the little guy while you profit off human misery. The confrontation had reached a fever pitch. Both men were now standing, facing each other across the desk like gladiators in an arena. The studio lights cast dramatic shadows across their faces, and the cameras captured every moment of raw, unfiltered hatred between two men who had crossed every line of professional courtesy. You know what? Smith said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than all his shouting. I'm done with this. I'm done with you. I'm done with this show. And I'm done pretending that what you do deserves any respect whatsoever. He turned toward the audience, then back to Kimmel, his eyes blazing with the kind of fury that ends careers and destroys relationships forever. Smith's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, addressing not just Kimmel, but the entire studio and the millions watching at home. You want to know what's really happening here? This man has spent years hiding behind comedy to justify his cruelty. He's turned being mean into an art form, and everyone just accepts it because he makes them laugh. The audience fell silent. Again, but this time it was different. They weren't afraid. They were listening. Smith had found his rhythm, his purpose in this moment of complete breakdown. He was no longer just defending himself. He was speaking for everyone who had ever been torn down by people like Kimmel. Every night, millions of people watch this show and think this is normal, Smith continued, his voice carrying the weight of years of Hollywood frustration. They think it's okay to destroy people for entertainment. They think it's acceptable to profit off human suffering as long as it's wrapped up in a joke. Kimmel tried to interrupt, his voice cracking with desperation. Will, you're making this into something it's not. This is just what? Smith whirled around, cutting him off mid-sentence. Just comedy? Just business? Just entertainment? There's nothing just about what you do, Jimmy. You systematically tear people down when they're at their lowest, and you've convinced yourself and everyone else that it's okay because you get paid to do it. The show's executive producer was now on stage, trying to signal for a commercial break, but both men ignored him completely. This had gone beyond television, beyond entertainment, beyond anything that could be contained by normal broadcast protocols. Kimmel's face was a mask of rage and humiliation. In front of millions of viewers, one of Hollywood's biggest stars was dismantling everything he'd built his career on. You're out of line, Smith. You're completely out of line. No, Jimmy. You've been out of line for years, and nobody had the courage to call you on it, Smith shot back. You've hidden behind this desk, behind your writers, behind your audience, thinking you were untouchable. But the truth is, you're just a bully who found a way to get paid for it. The studio audience was now completely riveted. What had started as a celebrity interview had transformed into something much more significant, a reckoning that felt like it had been building for years. Some people were crying, others were applauding, and everyone understood they were witnessing a moment that would be talked about for decades. Smith turned back to the audience one final time. I came here tonight to promote a movie, to do my job, to be professional. But sometimes being professional means standing up to people who think they can destroy others without consequences. Sometimes it means saying enough is enough. Kimmel, realizing he was losing everything, his audience, his credibility, his reputation, made one last desperate attempt to regain control. You think you're some kind of hero here? You think having a meltdown on my show makes you the good guy? Smith looked at him with something that might have been pity. I don't need to be the hero, Jimmy. I just need to be honest. And the honest truth is that you've spent so many years tearing other people down that you've forgotten how to build anything up. You've become exactly what you claim to fight against. A powerful person who uses that power to hurt people who can't fight back. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time in his career, the man who always had a comeback, always had a joke, always had a way to deflect criticism, was completely speechless. Smith straightened his jacket and looked directly into the camera. To everyone watching at home, I want you to remember something. Just because someone has a microphone doesn't mean they deserve your respect. Just because someone makes you laugh doesn't mean they're a good person. And just because something is called entertainment doesn't mean it's not causing real harm to real people. He turned and began walking toward the exit, but stopped and looked back at Kimmel one more time. You know what the saddest part is, Jimmy? You could have been better. You have talent. You have a platform. You have influence. You could have used all of that to lift people up, to make the world a little bit better. Instead, you chose to tear people down because it was easier, because it got you ratings, because you thought there would never be consequences. The studio was dead silent as Smith walked off the stage. The cameras followed him as he strode through the audience, past the security guards, past the producers frantically trying to salvage the situation. He didn't look back, didn't pause, didn't give anyone a chance to stop him or convince him to return. As the studio doors closed behind Will Smith, Jimmy Kimmel was left standing alone on his stage, facing an audience that was no longer laughing with him but staring at him with a mixture of shock, disappointment, and judgment. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, before someone finally yelled, "Cut!" Within hours, clips of the confrontation were spreading across every social media platform. The hashtags Kimmel Exposed and Will Smith Speaks Truth were trending worldwide. Late-night television would never be the same, and neither would Jimmy Kimmel's career. The man who had built his reputation on tearing others down had finally been torn down himself, and unlike his victims, he had done it to himself through his own cruelty and arrogance. The confrontation that started as just another celebrity interview had become a defining moment about respect, dignity, and the price of turning human suffering into entertainment. Will Smith had walked out of that studio not just as a celebrity defending himself, but as someone who had finally said what needed to be said about the culture of cruelty that had infected the entertainment industry. The conversation about accountability in media had begun, and there was no going back.